Greetings and welcome to this week's episode of Bronx Bombers. My name is Joe Rubenstein and it is Wednesday, May 9th, and the Yankees are in a tie for first place and a tie for the best record in Major League Baseball after trailing the Red Sox by 7.5 games as recently as April 20th. Just a few weeks ago, after that horrendous pummeling at home by the Miami Marlins of all teams, I was talking about the Yankees finding ways to lose ball games in the most distressing ways possible. Now, they're winning in pretty much every way possible, and look, it's not always pretty. Last night was Exhibit A. Sloppy game on both sides, we'll get into it, but hey, to quote the great philosopher Al Davis, just win, baby. And the Yankees have done just that. You can follow us on Twitter at Bombers Podcast is the handle. You can also send us questions. We'll try to answer each and every week in our mailbag segment here on the podcast. You can like us on Facebook, subscribe to our show on iTunes or Stitcher. You can also drop us a line, 646-854-4959. And as always, you can send your comments and questions to joe@bronxbomberspodcast.com. Really, however you'd like to engage with us. We love engaging with you. Coming up a little bit later on in our Twitter poll this week, some interesting results when we asked your thoughts on who should be our leadoff hitter, and I'll answer a fascinating question from one of our followers. Actually, it's more of a criticism than a question, about the concept of bandwagoning. Also, he's the resident expert at the blog Yanks Go Yard, Mike Calendrillo, will be rejoining the show for an interview you will not want to miss. And we'll go through the good, the bad, and the ugly from the last week of action. All that and more coming up on today's Bronx Bombers. Back in a moment.
Bronx Bombers Trivia. Which of these former Yankee greats was not a switch hitter? Is it A, Mark Teixeira, B, Mickey Rivers, C, Bernie Williams, or D, Mickey Mantle? The answer coming up a little bit later in the podcast.
And now here's Joe with this week's main thing.
Look, the Yankees have been dominating. There's no other way to say it. We've been playing and beating the best teams in the American League for weeks now. Just since our last podcast, 2 wins in Houston, the first on the strength of 2 home runs by Stanton and a blistering hot Severino. Sound familiar? The same thing happened last night. But Severino just manhandled that tough Astros lineup and did it very quickly. As David Cohn put it, pitching like he had a plane to catch, 10 strikeouts, another 11 last night. That's dominance. And the second win down in Texas was one of those patented 2018 comebacks. Astros were dominated by Tanaka for the most part, then had a very weird rally in the 7th, fueled in part by a hit by pitch on Alex Bregman that was not a hit by pitch. No idea what the umpires were looking at. He was not at all touched by that pitch. But no matter, the Astros rally, break a 28-inning scoreless streak, longest by a Yankees staff since 2009, scoring 4 runs off Tanaka and Green, and we get right off the mat in the 9th and hit him right back. That rally, fueled by a bases-loaded 2 RBI single by none other than the kid, the rookie, Gleyber Torres. More on him later. Yankees are now the only team in the majors with 4 wins in games they trailed at the start of the 9th inning, and we've outscored our opponents 21-3 in the 9th. And then home for Cleveland, and yet another first-place team totally handled. Yet more late innings heroics. Bullpen nearly wasted Sabathia's incredible performance, but Miguel Andujar had the walk-off, and then another positive step for Sonny Gray, as he pitched very well in Game 2. First time Sonny in pinstripes has put together back-to-back starts of at least 6 innings and no more than 2 runs allowed, so good for him. And then Game 3, Gleyber Torres again wears the hero's cape, walking it off. And last night, a sloppy game on both sides, but a win is a win, especially against the Red Sox, and good enough for a tie for first place. And we're starting to approach record-breaking levels of success here, folks. In the 17-game run we've been on, we've outscored our opponents by 62 runs, okay? That's nearly 4 per game. And that walk-off by Torres on Sunday took the headlines away from a kid who did something we haven't seen before. Domingo Germán, who we'll get to in a minute. But man, these are fun times for Yankee fans. And with last night's win, we've gone 16-1 in the last 17. The Yankees have not done that since 1953, when Dwight D. Eisenhower was president. And between then and now, there's been 9 championship teams. None of them have done this. And I'll say it again, we are still not clicking on all cylinders, believe it or not. And with that, we segue into the good, the bad, and the ugly as we take a hard look at some individual Yankee performers and assess how they did this week. And when you're as hot as the Yankees have been, there's going to be a lot of good performers. So this week, I'll try and focus on a handful that I haven't focused on yet, either because a good performance is more or less expected of them, as in Severino, or because they've been bad up to this point, as is the case with Neil Walker. But let's start with a guy who I've liked for a while now and talked about a bit on this podcast. We'll talk about him some more later with Mike Calendrillo, the 25-year-old pitcher Domingo Germán, who we picked up in a deal with the Marlins back in 2014. He was kind of an add-on. And after coming on in relief of Jordan Montgomery in Houston, Monty's down with a flexor strain in his throwing elbow. Never a good sign. They're saying 2 months, but we'll see. But in any case, Germán absolutely baffled the Astros and then comes out Sunday for his first ever start in the bigs, first ever, and proceeds to throw 6 no-hit innings against a very good Cleveland lineup. And it was just really cool. He later said after the game he'd had countless daydreams as a kid in the Dominican Republic of an opportunity just like this, and pitching a no-hitter. And man, sometimes dreams do come true. And in the last week against Houston and Cleveland, Germán has an ERA of 0, as in 0, just 3 walks in 10 innings with 13 strikeouts. And, we'll talk about him more later, as I said, but I think it's a safe bet that this guy, if he continues like this or even close to it, could be a member of our starting rotation in the not-so-distant future. And the fact is, right now, he is a member of our rotation with Montgomery down. So depth, folks, depth and pitching are the reasons for this magical run we've been on. The offense was there already, but depth up and down the lineup and solid pitching have gotten us where we are today. And another pitcher I haven't yet discussed in our good section who's been exceptionally good is Luis Severino. Again, dominating in Houston, 10 strikeouts down there, just making the Astros look silly. And then again last night, a few hits, but again, 11 strikeouts and just incredible work from Luis Severino. Also good, and this is the first time a player has vaulted from my ugly section last week to good the following week, is Neil Walker, who finally seems to have found himself in this past week. Walker has been one of the most productive Yankees. I mean, as much so as Gleyber Torres, especially in that Indian series. But he's been giving us highly professional at-bats with a very judicious eye. 6 walks in the past week. And Neil Walker also hit .364 with 2 RBIs this past week. And has started a number of rallies. Had that big pinch hit double in the 7th last night and ended up scoring on the Judge RBI single. So good for him. Terrible send by Phil Nevin on that play, by the way. Torres was out by a mile. But Walker never really had a spring training. He was signed so late by the Yankees, so it could be that Neil Walker's regular season sort of began this past week as far as what he can bring us, and let's hope it continues here in the next 2 against the Red Sox. In my bad section are a couple of players I like, the first of whom has made this section for 3 weeks now, and that is Brett Gardner, who looks just awful at the plate and has for weeks. His average last night dipped below 200, and he's been an absolute liability leading off games. We haven't paid for it, the Yankees have been winning, but it's really not good, and we'll get into Gardner a little later in our Twitter poll. The second member of our bad section, who has been spectacular up until the past week or so, is Didi Gregorius, who, after that big home run in L.A., where he took that ill-advised curtain call, just hasn't been the same hitter, not even close. This past week, Didi's hitting about .230, only 1 walk and 0 RBIs. I mean, I knew he wouldn't stay as hot as he was for most of April, and I'm sure he'll pick it up again, but for now at least, Didi's been supplanted as the hottest hitter in baseball by Mookie Betts and Mike Trout. Before we get to our ugly section, a runner-up to our good section is Aroldis Chapman. He's a bit of a cardiac kid. He sort of reminds me of John Wetland in that regard. Wetland was our closer in '96 when Rivera was still a setup man. We got spoiled to an extent by Mariano Rivera as our closer, the best ever, who made big league hitters look like little leaguers. And Chapman, he's been known to pitch himself into trouble with base runners. Last night he did the same thing, hitting a guy, but more often than not, he works himself out of it with that 101-plus mile-an-hour heater, which he can locate and which moves. I mean, he did blow a save against the Indians, his only blown save of the season, but that wild pitch maybe should have been handled by Sanchez. It's debatable, but Chapman for the season is pitching to an ERA of 1.75, and that game in Houston where Gleyber had that bases-loaded single, Aroldis Chapman finished that game by striking out the 2017 MVP MVP, Jose Altuve, just made him look silly. And think about that. We traded Chapman to get Torres, among others, 2 years ago. Get Chapman back, and in a single game, we have them performing like that against the world champions. It's really a beautiful thing. Another runner-up to my good section is Sonny Gray, whose performance thus far this season I have mercilessly dissected here, although I did say last week that his performance in Houston was a real step forward, and this week's performance against Cleveland I thought was a major step forward. Not without its blemishes. He still falls behind too much, still too many base runners, but the difference now, he works those 2-0 counts back into his favor, and he works himself out of jams, and he's just carrying himself with more confidence. Maybe part of that is Roman. It could be, it could be a placebo. A placebo is a harmless pill that has no real physiological effect, but has a psychological effect. So Roman could be that for Gray. I mean, Sanchez, who we'll get to in a minute, has called some really good pitching performances from behind the plate, including that game in Houston where Montgomery went down. But look, if having Romine as his catcher brings out the better in Sonny Gray, then I'm all for it, especially since Romine, who also makes my runner-up list, has been performing really well with the bat, hitting .333 this past week with a walk and a pair of doubles. But the ugly this week is headlined by the defense of Gary Sanchez, which I thought maybe there was some improvement, early in the season, but that proved to be a mirage, or maybe I was just wearing my Yankee-colored glasses, and the worst part of it is, it seems like every time he lets a ball get past him, it hurts us. In Houston, a pass ball moves Brian McCann into scoring position. At home against Cleveland, what was, ruled a wild pitch from Chapman, but really he probably should have had it. That ties the game and blows the save. Last night, a fifth-inning leadoff strikeout by Eduardo Nunez, and Sanchez can't handle the third strike. Nunez gets on base. Severino ends up throwing 30-plus pitches that inning, and Boston gets on the board. It's unacceptable, really, and it's beyond irritating at this point that he can't get this together, frankly. A lot of them just seem lazy, a lot of these pass balls, like he's moving in slow motion. But whatever's happening and whatever the cause, Gary Sanchez at this point in time is an inadequate defensive catcher. And I don't mind saying so. And don't tell me about the throwing arm. Don't tell me about the pitch framing. I'm done. These pass balls and wild pitches are costing us runs. They've cost us games in the past. And unfortunately for Gary, in the series against Houston and Cleveland, we got to look at two top-notch defensive catchers in McCann and Gomes. And the numbers bear this out. He has now allowed 21 wild pitches and 6 pass balls and is now worst in the majors in those categories. And look, sure his bat outweighs the defensive negatives, although really, right now at least, even that's debatable. His average last night slid down to 193. And you have to wonder, in tight playoff games or crucial pennant race games, if Boone DHs him and puts Romine behind the plate or substitutes Romine late in games. Because again, I thought I would see some improvement this season, but there really has been none. He almost looks worse, actually. Back in a moment. We are joined this week on Bronx Bombers by Mike Calendrillo, the resident expert at the blog Yanks Go Yard, which is one of the go-to destinations for really smart, really on-point Yankee analysis. Just last week, Mike had a great interview with Buster Olney of ESPN, and he's got another one this week with Tim Kirchian coming out. So highly recommend it, Yanks Go Yard. And Mike was also the first guest on the first episode of this podcast a few months back. And Mike, it's great to have you back on the show, brother. How you doing?
Oh, wonderful. It's my pleasure, Joe. You've been doing a fantastic job, and I expect you to keep it up. It's really a wonderful podcast.
Well, I appreciate that. Now, last time we talked, we were stuck in the middle of a really slow off-season, but things have picked up just a bit, and we've got a lot to cover. So why don't we start with the performance of Domingo Germán on Sunday, the record-breaking performance, I should say. First time a pitcher in their debut has thrown 6 no-hit innings along with 9 strikeouts. This is a guy that I've had my eye on for a while. I like his stuff. I like his composure. And while I also like Montgomery, I think this Germán might even have more raw talent. But give us your take on Domingo Germán, including whether or not Boone did the right thing in pulling him on Sunday after 6 no-hit innings, and what role could he potentially play on our pitching staff?
Yeah, right off the bat, you have to say that, Boone's gotten a lot of criticism, some justified, some not. I think he definitely did the right thing. The guy, Germán, had never thrown more than 61 pitches in an outing, and that was the previous outing when he came in for Montgomery and pitched those 4 scoreless innings. So he's just not stretched out to this point. He's traditionally been a reliever, even though he has seen time in the minor leagues as a starter. You just can't let the guy, throw 90, 100 100 pitches. And according to Coley Harvey of ESPN, he told me that the day before, Boone said if he could have gotten 5 innings and 70 pitches from Germán, that was more than enough. So obviously Germán far exceeded expectations. As far as going forward, the kid's got 3 solid pitches. I mean, his fastball touches 97. He's got a changeup that just falls off the shelf. His slider makes people look silly. He's got a lot of Luis Severino in him. He really does. Now, he has a track record of throwing a lot of balls, and that's going to be his downfall. And he only walked 2 the other day, so there are signs that he's getting that straightened out. But there's still a lot to remain. You know, what exactly is going to happen when Montgomery comes? Again, you can never have too much starting pitching. It's a good problem to have, but you want to see some consistency from this kid. It was a record-breaking day. You couldn't have asked for anything more. You got to remember, this is a guy that was included in a Nathan Eovaldi trade from the Marlins, and I know general manager Brian Cashman came out and said, "Oh, well, at the time the Yankees felt that he was their number 1 prospect." How much I believe that remains to be seen. But again, this is a guy in 2015 had Tommy John, and just last offseason he was almost traded to the Mets for Jay Bruce. Yet the Mets decided to go with the money from the Indians. So clearly, this is a guy who hasn't always been the number 1 person in the eyes of the Yankees moving forward. But again, he opened those eyes. He showed what he does possess as far as his stuff. It's legit. If you had to move him to the bullpen, it's certainly not a bad thing. We do know that the Yankees certainly need to fill a little bit of that long relief situation. Luis Cessa is not the guy that you necessarily want to go to if someone goes down with an injury or if someone just has a bad outing. So not a problem, but I, like you, would love to see how this transpires when Montgomery, hopefully comes back in 6 to 8 weeks, because again, if Germán pitches like this, obviously we would want to keep him as Yankee fans, but he also turns into wonderful trade bait if, say, a Patrick Corbin comes available or a Dallas Keuchel or whomever, interestingly enough, because, again, the Yankees have a lot of young kids, but do they need that one go-to shutdown type of arm that they thought they were getting in Sonny Gray? That remains to be seen, but you definitely still want to see a solid number 2. Maybe it is Tanaka. Maybe he continues his good run, but a solid number 2 behind Luis Severino, to me, is the thing that this team needs to separate itself from the rest of the AL.
Now, of all the rookies that have shined this season so far, and there have been a few, Germán, Tyler Austin, Miguel Andujar, but Gleyber Torres is proving to be everything everyone said about him and more. You watch him play, and he does not in any way look like a 21-year-old rookie. And not just with the bat, I love his defense as well. I mean, after watching him these past couple weeks, Mike, could we be looking at a potential Rookie of the Year, a perennial All-Star, maybe, it sounds crazy, but even a future Hall of Famer, or is it too early to say?
No, I mean, the All-Star thing, why not? The Hall of Fame thing, remains to be seen. Obviously, hopefully he has a 20-year career and he can ride off into the sunset like Derek Jeter. But Rookie of the Year, I mean, if he continues to play the way he is, he may very well have to, outbeat his teammate Miguel Andujar. But this kid is for real. I mean, he just looks so smooth. He looks like a veteran that's been playing the game at this level for years. I mean, it's just crazy because you look at the scouting reports before this year, before last year as well, before he tore his elbow up in that horrific slide at home plate, and everybody said he was all bat, no glove, that his glove had a long way to come, and he was still lacking that. Yet this move to second base makes you think, well, maybe that was a position that he should have been playing all along. Obviously, he's got a shortstop arm that he's proven many a time with these gorgeous plays into the hole, but he just looks super comfortable, and maybe even moving him to second base has taken that, I've got to be the captain of the infield type of mentality away from it, and it has allowed him to just succeed with the bat because he just continues to produce in these super pressurized situations, and really the sky is the limit for the kid. I said on Twitter a couple days ago, this guy could be the next leadoff hitter for the Yankees if and when his power develops. Well, actually, his power is already here. It's just a matter of him getting more and more comfortable in the box, and it's just an amazing thing to watch that. Man, this guy just took over the second base position, and we may never see Tyler Wade or whoever else at second base again because he is the real deal.
Now, a couple of guys who struggled early were Sonny Gray and Dellin Betances, although both seem to have righted the ship to an extent. Betances did have a bad inning on Sunday. That was his second inning in that game. but the first was great. And that one bad inning, shouldn't cancel out the fact that he had a number of very good, even dominating appearances leading up to that. And you made the point on Twitter that I agree with, that Betances should probably just be a one-inning guy, but give us your thoughts on Betances' progression so far this season, your reasoning on why he should only pitch one inning per game, and if you think this resurgence is real or not.
Well, let me start out by saying I hope it's real. Everybody thinks that whenever we criticize or, we point out flaws that we're not fans. We are fans. We want this team to succeed. We want the players on it to succeed. They're there for a reason. As far as Dellin Betances is concerned, he's just at the point in his career where you have to, when he's good, you have to get what you got and get him out of the game, because you're pushing your luck to a certain extent. He has struggled, and he went through that just streak of where you never knew what you were going to get. So now that he seems that he's really turned the corner, and really because he's attacking the strike zone, he's doing a lot what Sonny Gray has done in his last two starts. He's throwing strikes. The ball's got a little bit more movement on it. He just seems much more comfortable. So to me, I didn't agree with Boone keeping him out there for a second inning, because you're playing with fire. You're building up his confidence, whether that is to use in a 7th or 8th inning role, depending on when Tommy Conley comes back, or if you're looking to trade him, because we know of the arbitration story. We know that eventually his contract is coming to an end, and when we don't know if the Yankees are going to pony up a large sum of money to bring, a middle reliever back. But regardless, you want this guy to be at his very best every time he goes out on the mound, and he has been. So I just don't understand why you would push your luck and let him in the game, even though you've kind of gotten what you expected or what you wanted out of him. Now, moving forward, it remains to be seen. Obviously, Boone's getting paid the big bucks. He knows what he's going to do. He's got obviously a read of the clubhouse that we don't. But I like what I see. The same goes for Sonny Gray. Again, he's been much more in tune, whether it's because of Austin Romine as his primary catcher. Some people don't agree with that, but it seems to be working. Again, Sonny Gray is attacking the zone. Now when he goes up 0-2, he's looking to put the batter away. He's not, mixing and matching, trying to throw an off-speed pitch to try to get the guy swinging. He's going right at him, whether it's climbing up the zone or going in the dirt, not worrying maybe about Sanchez's so much his blocking ability. He's got the Romine, he's got the trust. So again, if Betances can continue on this, upward plane, the trajectory the rest of the season looks wonderful. And again, that's what the Yankees are going to need to distance themselves, and hopefully starting with this 3-game series against the Sox.
Now, a player who's been a good Yankee and kind of a fan favorite over the past 10 years or so is Brett Gardner, but he's been scuffling. There's no two ways about it. So 2 questions on Gardy. Do you think this is his final year in pinstripes? And if so, what's your preference and your prediction for who takes over as our leadoff hitter next season, or maybe even this season if Gardner continues to struggle?
Yeah, that same question I've asked to Buster Olney last week, and I asked it Tim Kirkjian today. What are the Yankees going to do? And it really comes down to, as long as they're winning, they're going to keep Gardner in the lineup because he's that veteran presence that, there's not a ton of left on this team, him and Sabathia and a couple other guys, and he still gives you very, very good defense. Now, he's lost a step. You can see it on the base paths at time and once in a while in the outfield, but he's still a very, very good outfielder. As far as moving forward, there's that clause in the contract where the Yankees can basically, pay him and he goes away, and it's a lot less than if they were to bring him back. And again, at 34, this is just expected. It's father time. It catches up to everyone. So he will continue to be there. Depending on how the team is doing, it could be time to work in somebody. If you don't give Clint Frazier a shot this year, maybe it comes next year. But again, the Yankees are funny. They may go ahead and put Stanton in left field full time next year and rotate that DH spot. Who knows? Maybe Bryce Harper becomes the guy they put in left field, or they move Hicks to left and put Harper. There's so many possibilities. But the thing is Gardner's been great. He'll continue to be important for the clubhouse and the team moving forward. But OBP will only get you so far in my book, and I go back and forth with people, and I know OBP is the most important thing when you're looking at a leadoff hitter. But you also need a leadoff hitter that's not going to strike out. That, to me, that's just as important almost. You need a guy that's going to set the table, that's going to help be on base when Aaron Judge gets up. So obviously the OPP was super high at one point, and now it's steadily declined. People don't want to look at batting average for whatever reason. Fine, obviously it's quite low. So this is not the Gardner that we're accustomed to. So to your second question, if Gardner does start to see some time on the bench, there's 2 places that I go for a leadoff hitter. One is is Aaron Hicks because he's a switch hitter. Now, obviously, this is, he only leads off once per game per se, but he can then cause situations during the rest of the game when you've got to mix and match your pitchers. So you don't have to worry about, maneuvering a guy lefty-lefty, righty-lefty. That's a situation that I think is pretty, still underrated to this day. Hicks has good speed. He can steal a base if need be. He's actually one of the few guys this season who has attempted to bunt, which, again, is something that seems extinct in today's game. But again, if you've got somebody batting ninth, say it's Gleyber Torres, and you need to get him over in the latter stages of the game, at least you can count on a guy like Hicks to move him over. Now, if not Hicks as a leadoff hitter, as I alluded to earlier, I like Gleyber Torres. The guy has got a professional eye. He knows a good pitch from a bad pitch. He can drive the ball the opposite way, as we saw that right center field home run to win the game last week. The kid is not your prototypical rookie, and I would trust him in a big spot to work a count and get on base. Will that happen anytime this year? I don't know, because I think like I was told, it's going to really depend on how the team plays, and if they're winning, they'll go with as is. But again, injury could change all that. So my first option would be Hicks, and I know he's an inconsistent guy. I know there's streaks of time where he looks as bad as anybody out there with the bat, but then there's times as well where he just makes you shake his head, because he could be so good if he just consistently put it together. And that's why the Yankees traded for him all those years ago from Minnesota. But Hicks A, and then I would go Torres B.
Now, Stanton really has not taken off. He's had some timely hits. That big double against Cleveland, scoring the winning run on Andujar's walk-off, and he had that 2-home-run game in Houston, but he leads the majors in strikeouts. So, Mike, what are you seeing from Stanton, and is it time to worry, that he hasn't broken out now that we're into May? Or is this just a combination of a new environment and facing new pitchers, and everybody should just chill out a bit?
Right. It's a little bit of both. I mean, to be honest, I'm not worried because the Yankees are playing so well. If the Yankees were still, struggling before this unbelievable 16-game stretch, then, it'd be, a little bit of cause for concern. And I wasn't a huge fan when the Yankees seemed to make a big deal of dropping him one spot in the lineup. I mean, if you were going to drop him, you needed to drop him to 6, 7. Really, so he can figure it out and see that, there's other guys around him that are carrying the load, which obviously he knows. And when he goes out and hits 2 home runs like he did last week, there are the signs there that it's figuring it out. But the thing to me is, he's not in his accustomed right field. That's the position that he's played his entire life. He hit whenever he played there. So now that he's been bouncing around from left field to DH to right field to back, some guys just aren't accustomed to that. Some guys, are David Ortiz and only want to pick up the bat every 4 times and that's it. And some other guys, like even look at Chipper Jones. When you moved him from third base to left field, the offense struggled to a certain extent. So that's the thing. You don't really know what's going to take a guy like Stanton to snap out of it. To me, I always said that I would have preferred to keep Stanton in right field, where he's played forever and ever, and move a more athletic, a couple years younger guy like Judge to left, because, again, as great as a right fielder as Judge is, I think he would have made that transition that much smoother, and that way you're stronger. You've got a guy in right that knows, you've got a more athletic guy in left, and then if it's Hicks or Gardner or whoever in center field, to me that's a better outfield, but it doesn't seem like the way it's going to go, so we have to figure out, okay, well then, if Stanton is going to stay in left field, then hopefully, he fights the sun and he can play the angles in the stadium and everything works out. But, and every time he hits 2 home runs, you think, well, this is it. He's going to snap out of it. But it hasn't happened. But again, I still have faith that he will go on that 3-week run like he traditionally does, where he hits 7, 8, 9, 10 home runs out, and everybody will say, wow, he has 30 home runs already. Because for as poor as he's really played, he still has 7 home runs. He's still top 5 on pretty much every offensive category on the team. And again, looking at where the Yankees stand, 1 game out of first place going into this series with the Red Sox, to be upset, to even contemplate booing this guy, it's a little nitpicky. To me, the best is yet to come. And when he finally does wake up, it's going to be scary to watch.
Okay, final question, Mike. We just won 3 series, 2 of them sweeps, against what I think are the 3rd, 4th, and 5th best teams in the American League, Houston, Cleveland, and LA, going 9-1, 6 of those wins on the road. Now Boston rolls into town, and as we record this on Tuesday, first pitch of Game 1 is about 3 hours away. But Mike, as I said before the season started, I think their pitching is good but overrated. Sale and Porcello have been excellent, but the combined ERA of the other 3 is 4.8. 3.46. The offense has been good as well, powered by Mookie Betts and to a lesser extent J.D. Martinez and surprisingly Mitch Moreland. But others have not shown up. Eduardo Nunez, Jackie Bradley Jr., Christian Vasquez nowhere to be found. But what's your take on this Boston club, Mike? Are they as good as their record, or have they fattened up to some extent against some really bad teams?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, you want to be a World Series contender, you've got to beat the bad teams. So, they've done that. And, the Yankees need to do that as well. Just like when we play the Marlins, you can't drop any games, but, it happens. So you give credit where credit is due. But like you, I'm not scared of this pitching staff. I mean, Chris Sale is Chris Sale. Arguably, he could be the best left-handed starter in the game. But look at this Yankee lineup. I mean, we're stacked right-handed. Whether it's the rookies, whether it's Judge, Stanton, I mean, all of these guys, Gary Sanchez, who continually gets left out somehow. If anybody's going to hit Chris Sale, it's going to be this right-handed lineup. So, again, Porcello's a fine pitcher. Do I think he's still the 22-game Cy Young winner? No, I think he's more, somewhere around the 12, 13-game winner, maybe more than he won last year, which was, 5 games. But no one else on this staff worries me. Joe Kelly wants to hit batters. So be it. But again, that's not the way that you're going to get out these right-handed hitters. So, I can see Boston trying to go out and make a move. They were in on Cole just like we were in the offseason. So there's going to be a move out there to be made. Obviously, they're going to want to beef up that rotation because Eduardo Rodriguez, Drew Pomeranz, he's going in game 1 against Severino. That's not scaring anybody. And again, those are left-handed pitchers that this Yankee right-handed heavy lineup should be able to beat up.
All right, well done, Mike. A pleasure as always. You do great work. Love your blog. That's Yanks Go Yard, which all of you guys should go check out. Mike, thank you so much for being part of the show once again. We'll do it again real soon, okay?
Absolutely. Anytime, Joe. Thank you.
All right, we'll come back. More Bronx Bombers in just a moment.
And now the answer to today's Bronx Bombers trivia question. Which of these former Yankees, Mark Teixeira, Mickey Rivers, Bernie Williams, or Mickey Mantle, was not a switch hitter? The answer? B. Mickey Rivers. And now here's Joe with this week's Twitter poll.
Yes, this week's Twitter poll results are in. We asked you this: who should bat leadoff for the Yankees? And 46% of our followers on Twitter at Bombers Podcast said Brett Gardner, 27% said Gleyber Torres, 16% said Aaron Hicks, and 11% said Didi Gregorius. Well, the one guy on that list who I would definitely not have leading off is Didi, with the way his power is developing and his knack for big hits with guys on base. You don't want 150 some odd plate appearances for Didi with no men on base. You just don't. Torres and Hicks are both entirely plausible and would be good options. They both have shown good plate discipline. Between those two, I guess I'd prefer Gleyber over Hicks. And with Gardner, who's in the walk year of his contract, as I said before, I don't want to, continue to bury the guy, but he's been terrible. I did a little survey of the other 14 primary leadoff hitters in the American League, because when I bring this up on Twitter, I get a ton of flack about how Gardner is some kind of on-base machine, which is false. In fact, the only leadoff hitters with worse on-base percentages than Gardy's .322 are second baseman Whit Merrifield of the Royals and second baseman Ian Kinsler of the Angels. Kinsler, like many players this year that have switched teams, has had a disastrous start, hitting just .198. The top 3 leadoff hitters in on-base percentage, by the way, are Curtis Granderson up in Toronto, Joe Mauer in Minnesota, and Mookie Betts. So Gardy has not been an on-base machine. He's been an automatic out, and he's shown none of the power he showed last year, just 1 home run, and that was on opening day. His strikeouts, as I said, are way up, 33 already. Last season he only struck out 122 times, and this year he's on pace for 165, okay? And his OPS of 578, again, OPS measures on-base plus power hitting, is second worst in the American League, above only that of Kinsler. And if you compare his on-base percentage and OPS to the other 3 players in my poll, that is Didi, Gleyber, and Hicks, his numbers are by far the worst. So it seems to me, although it's been a small sample size, that Gleyber would be the best option if the Yankees were going to change up the batting order. He's at the top of that list in both on-base percentage and OPS, although Hicks could work very well too. But look, in Gardner's defense, and I like Gardner, I always have, he's a consummate professional, and his April last year was really bad as well, but he really started to hit in May. In fact, May was his best month of the season. He hit .327, 9 home runs, 21 RBIs. So if the Yankees could get even half of that production, that would be phenomenal. And let's hope he busts out soon in both the on-base and power departments because, the past few weeks, really the whole season, has been pretty dismal for Brett Gardner. All right, from this week's mailbag, our question of the week here on Bronx Bombers comes from Hector in Yonkers. And by the way, the email is joe@bronxbomberspodcast.com, or you can find us on Twitter @BombersPodcast is the handle, or leave us a message at 646-854-4959. If you have any questions you want to have us answer on any future episodes, we are more than happy to do so. And Hector writes, I think it's very disloyal of you to say Gardner is a bad player, and also how you kill Betances one week and say he's good the next, which is the definition of a bandwagoner. Why don't you lighten up and give people a chance? Well, thanks for that question, Hector. It's a good one, but I have to disagree with its premise, or premises, namely that I said Brett Gardner is a bad player, which I didn't, and that I'm a bandwagoner, which I'm not, and that I don't give people a chance, which I do. Okay, so first of all, as I've said more than once, in my segment, which I call the good, the bad, and the ugly, when a player makes that bad section, I'm not saying he's a bad player, I'm saying he's had a bad week. That segment is just about the individual players' performances in the games that have occurred since my previous podcast. The Yankees don't really have any bad players right now, but if they did, I would certainly say so. And as far as giving people a chance, Hector says that I kill Betances one week and then praise him the next. That's giving people a chance. We had the same situation this week with Neil Walker. In other words, none of this is personal. I have no axe to grind with any player. I just call balls and strikes as I see them, and I view my job here as, yes, to be a fan, but more than that, to tell the truth. And I've never felt that fan loyalty should require the suspension of critical thinking. I mean, if I was just a cheerleader here, I think personally that it would be a very boring show, and I don't think, any player should be immune from reasonable criticism. So it really is that simple. If a player is playing well, I'll say so and why, and if a player is playing poorly, I'll say so and why. No personal favorites, no perennial punching bags. My personal favorite, isn't any player. The Yankees as a team is my personal favorite, and my perennial punching bag is the Red Sox. And as far as bandwagoner, none of this fits that definition, really. I mean, a bandwagoner is someone who roots for a team when they do well and abandons them when they fail. I've rooted for this team consistently since I was 8 years old in 1977, and that period has included some of the very worst Yankee teams in the past century. I'm talking about the late 80s, very early 90s. My support never wavered, and I always root for every Yankee player to succeed, end of story. So, my little self-defense here is not complete, but I appreciate the question from Hector. I've gotten a few of these criticisms, so I thought it was time to address it. Most of my comments are very positive, but not all of them are, so I thought I'd just speak out on this because, you do see these sorts of disagreements on social media. Some people seem to think that any criticism is equivalent to disloyalty. I don't happen to feel that way, but again, I appreciate the question because it gave me a chance to think about and clarify, what it is I'm doing here, which is, simply put, to provide truthful commentary on what I see every week in the players and the numbers. And that'll do it for this week's episode of Bronx Bombers. Again, don't forget, you can subscribe to this podcast on iTunes or Stitcher. Follow us on Twitter @BombersPodcast is the handle. Like us on Facebook as well. But most of all, have faith in the Yankees. And these days, that's not very hard. We'll see you again next week.